I'm joined at the moment by Paul Huxley from Christian Concern. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Andy.
It's lovely to have you back again. Now, a little while ago, we were chatting to you about all sorts of things, including the Darlington nurses. Today, we want to chat to you a little bit more about Kristie Higgs. But just give us a really brief overview of what's happening with the Darlington nurses. What was all that about, and what's the latest with that at the moment?
So the Darlington Nurses is a group of nurses led by four of them publicly, who are who have had an issue at the hospital that they work at, where they wanted to use their changing space, but there was a man who believes himself to be a woman who was using that space and being quite inappropriate, from what we can tell in that space. And now the issue is, even publicly, some of these nurses have had bad experiences in the past with men and kind of and sexual assault of sorts, and so they particularly don't want that space to be taken over by someone who is acting inappropriately in that way. And so they wanted to say, look, we want to have our single sex space where we're safe to change and not have this kind of behaviour. But the hospital trust kept on saying, no, you've got to be re-educated. You've got to allow this, and so on. So they're standing up for that safety, those safe single sex spaces. And they've got a legal challenge along those lines, but they're also speaking to various politicians as a petition to support them, and so on. So they're standing up for that.
It's good. We were just saying this before we started chatting, that being a Christian, there is a cost to having a faith, which is why in the Bible it says we need to weigh out carefully. It's not just something you jump into. It is an amazing life to follow Jesus Christ, but there is a cost to that. And at some point, we are going to have to stand up if our faith matters to us at all, which is leading us on, I think, into what Kristie Higgs has done. So, Kristie Higgs, she's been in the news. Just give us an overview, because this goes back quite a long way. And there's now been, from my own perspective, something has actually happened, which has, hopefully for her, concluded some of that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So back in 2018, she was working as a pastoral assistant at one school. But she saw, this was at the time when there was a lot of talk in the media about a new change that was being made to relationships and sex education, where that was being made compulsory by law. And some of the materials that were being used in this kind of context were inappropriate, certainly as far as Christians are concerned, were inappropriate for young children to be using, to be accessing. And one of those programs that was being used at the school, that not where Kristie worked, but where her children went to, which was a Church of England school, as in the school that her children went to was a Church of England school, and they were using some materials called the No Outsiders program, and some of the recommended books on that really taught transgender ideology type stuff. You know, you can become the opposite thing to what you are. Red crayon can become blue crayon. These sorts of things, sort of so subtly kind of weaving in those themes when they're teaching really young children. And she didn't like this, and she wanted to say something about it. So she shared one petition about compulsory relationships and sex education on her Facebook wall to her friends. And she also shared one other article that went into this red crayon, blue crayon book and what the problems with that were. And so she simply did that. And then one of her Facebook friends reported her to her school and said, I can't believe that someone like this is working at the school. And there was a really intense disciplinary. This is back in just before Christmas 2018. And she lost her job, and she's been fighting to rectify that with the help of the Christian Legal Centre ever since.
6 years of fighting. I know that's not 6 years of every single day doing something, but that's a long time. It's a long process, because you can never really relax, can you? Because you get through one thing knowing it's maybe going to go somewhere else, and you've got to prepare for that, and you never really switch off. And if somebody who is ostensibly one of your friends is now reporting you for having an opinion, it can be really, really sort of it's troubling, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and this case was really. It seemed particularly strong because this was just a friends. It wasn't, say, a Twitter post where it could be kind of seen by absolutely anyone. It was really just meant for her friends who would understand her, who know her well enough, hopefully, to know that she wasn't someone who's horrible and kind of saying horrible things about people and treating people badly. She's a Christian. She's a very genuine Christian, very gentle, really. And that's just not who she is. But nevertheless, the school saw fit to say, well, they could have argued later in court that, well, yes, it's just on Facebook, but anyone can take a screenshot of it and then share it anywhere. And, the reputation of the school can be harmed and all these sorts of things. People will think that the school agrees with her on this. These sorts of claims, which I think are quite clearly wrong, but that's what the kind of thing that they were saying, why it particularly seemed to be unfair to Kristie.
It's an interesting one, though, because whether you agree with her opinion and her perspective or not, to me personally, is a completely irrelevant. It's a moot point. The fact that she has an opinion and wants to actually share an opinion, I think is really fundamental in the United Kingdom at the moment, that we've got these polarized positions where, from my perspective, I don't get into politics because I don't really understand it much, but you kind of got centre, left and right, which I don't really understand. But people who are on the left, they're really not on the left anymore. And people who are on the right, they're kind of not on the right. And you've got this mishmash of polarized peoples who can't believe that other people don't think what they think. But actually, the ability to express what we think is not just about freedom of speech. It's not just about my rights. It's about, if we want a civilized society, the ability to actually have an opinion which somebody doesn't have and be able to express that opinion freely is such, for me personally, such an intrinsically important part of any good society where we want to get on with each other.
Well, some people definitely say that that the importance of freedom of speech is that you have your battle over words rather than actually having battles and actually fighting in physically, that you're able to resolve things and kind of try and work things through, because you're actually talking with people about what they genuinely believe. And of course, if you have a situation where in the main places where people kind of express those views, we don't go down to the town square and stand on boxes very often. I mean, some street preachers do, and that's fantastic. But not many people kind of go out there and have a marketplace of ideas in the literal sense. People go on social media, and that's where they are able to share their views on things and say, well, I think this is a good idea. This is bad. I'm going to change my profile picture to support this cause. I'm going to do this. And that's where people share their ideas. So if you can't post what you really believe in those kind of places, with even to a small number of people who are your friends, without that coming back to your workplace and your workplace deciding that's not what we stand for, therefore we're allowed to fire you. That just chills the whole free speech, and everyone's going to start going, well, what can I really say on social media? What, am I only allowed to just share little jokes or kind of memes, whatever? Am I only able to say things that don't even matter to me? Like your opinion on the traitors or something, if you're only able to say those things, then where are you actually ever going to say the things that matter the most to you?
I was thinking about our own UK parliamentary system. We have the House of Commons. You have, at the moment, you've got the Labour who are in power. You've got Conservatives who are the next biggest majority. Therefore, they are kind of the shadow government. They're supposed to oppose each other, not needlessly, we hope, but they're supposed to challenge each other. And I think I actually quite like the basis of that. But right in the heart of the main part of our government, if you like, the bit we actually get to see where the members of parliament are talking and working out how the country's going to work, what's the legislation going to be, are we going to deal with this law, all that stuff, they are disagreeing with each other quite vehemently, almost like not necessarily great sometimes, but I really value the fact that they are able to disagree in a public environment, and really that should be exactly replicated, not with the shouting necessarily, but across the UK, surely, because we need to be able to have those conversations to say, do you know what, that opinion you have, we don't think that's correct. We need to be able to say that. And if we can't say that, then we're just in sort of little vacuums, and all those vacuums start bouncing around. And we have exactly what we have now, I think, is lots of polarized positions where we're not looking at what we can do together. We're looking at why we're not the same. How do we differ? Right, well, we believe this, you believe that, and therefore we can't talk to you. And well, actually, what do you have in common that you can talk about? Because actually, that's a really helpful thing to do.
Well, I mean, there we have the problem with technology in a sense, because when you go onto any social media site, whatever you like, I don't know, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, whatever you actually can spend your time on, that is showing you the things that it thinks you're going to like, that you're going to react to, that you're going to watch, and that it can serve you adverts on. So everyone is getting their own tailor-made experience the whole time. And so when these algorithms that decide what posts to show you on these various platforms, when those are thinking about what they're going to show you, then they're going to show you the stuff that you like. And so you're going to get a sense quickly that the stuff you like is all that's out there. And so you're going to have your opinions reinforced, virtually whatever they are. So you're going to naturally cluster around a bunch of people over here who believe one thing, and then people over here who think that everyone believes what they think, and they think something totally different to these people. So that is one of the huge problems that we have at the moment, because we can't really speak to each other and have these kind of conversations. I mean, it's interesting you say about the House of Commons, because there are obviously some very strict rules and protocols about exactly how people speak in that forum. For example, you're not allowed to call someone a liar. You have to say they're economical with the truth and things like this if you're trying to say that. So there are actually some very strict rules on that. But you're right in the sense, definitely, that we need these spaces and this ability to talk to each other, and that's eventually what Kristie's case hopefully will have achieved.
I definitely will come back to more to Kristie's case, but because that's the point of why you're here today. But I just think it's interesting to talk about some of effectively how she got into trouble, because how she got into trouble is by having an opinion and actually saying, I think this, which she's absolutely entitled to do. And the case has borne that out. But I think that the point about algorithms is probably something people don't really comprehend, because social media, I read somebody said, if you're watching this on Instagram, then specifically you're going to be getting to see the stuff that you're interacting with. It'll show you more of that. And I thought, no, actually that's not how it works at all. What do we want to show people today? We're going to show them this, because I can go through Instagram, because I'm on loads of social media channels. I'm thinking, I have absolutely no interest in this whatsoever. And as soon as you pause just a moment to move your thumb, he's interested. And then you get loads of that stuff. And I'm thinking, but I don't care about this. And this is the problem about algorithms. It is artificial intelligence is not as intelligent as the title might suggest. It is somebody, a programmer somewhere, who's making it react in a certain way. We saw that when AI first came out, and there were certain things that AI would not tell you about. Why is that? Because somebody's programmed it not to tell you. So it's not as intelligent as we want to believe it could be, or as beneficial. But I was just thinking about how some people I really respect will buy the Guardian newspaper one day, the Telegraph, the Telegram, the Daily Express. They'll buy all the different papers from different political spheres, because they don't just want to read one person's opinion. And I think most of us would probably understand if you buy the Guardian, you're probably more socialist leaning. You probably agree with some of the stuff they say. And I bought the Guardian, but I also buy papers on the opposite end of the spectrum when I can read a paper, because I don't just want to read one paper, because I don't really sort of affiliate to any particular political spectrum. Therefore, I want to have a cross section. The problem with Facebook, like you said, is Instagram, TikTok, whichever, is that we end up seeing a very computer generated version of what we think. We see CGI in films. Well, it's kind of the same thing on the socials. We're not seeing the truth. We're seeing a portion of the truth that someone is allowing us to see.
Well, maybe we should have a discussion about the film The Matrix one day, because that's almost talking about this exact issue, because it's going back to some postmodern philosophers and these sorts of things, who are making exactly that point. We're not interacting with the world itself, but we're interacting with a version of the world, a very narrow version of the world, which is exactly what algorithms are feeding us nowadays.
That's a chat I would love to have another time. Right. Good film. Right. Let's go back to Kristie Higgs. So just 2018, I didn't know it was quite, I thought it was 2019. I mean, it's splitting hairs, but this is a big part of Kristie's life where she's standing, not intentionally, but she's standing for the Christians in the UK. It's probably not where she thought, I'll put this Facebook out and then I'll have this. I seriously doubt that was her intention. She probably just had her thought, I'll share this. We've all done that. So she gets sacked from her job, and then there's this huge sort of set of court cases, especially for others who are listening. So when you get sacked in the UK, what's the kind of legal steps? Because it's not just you're sacked. There's paces that then you can appeal. So how do the stages of this work?
So normally there'll be some internal disciplinary process that your employer will have. So particularly, if you're working for a school or public authority of some kind, then you're almost certainly going to have quite detailed processes for that kind of thing. If you're working in like a tiny cafe, it's just three of you, then probably not going to be quite as meticulous. So you have that whole process, but then at the end of that, then you can be dismissed, depending on what your employer says, and whatever they say essentially goes at that point. But the way you can challenge whether that was a fair dismissal or not, or whether you've been treated badly in any other way, is you take your employer to an employment tribunal, which is a sort of court where you argue your case and you say, well, I've been mistreated in this way, I've been unfairly dismissed. There are various different claims you can make about harassment and these sorts of things. And so you start to challenge the behaviour there, and then that goes up through various courts where each one can challenge the last one's decision, essentially.
Am I right? Am I misremembering this? Was one of those courts, was the panel had to be switched because there was, let's just call it political bias? Or am I misremembering?
Yes, no, there were two recusals in this case. So at the employment tribunal, this is exactly what happened to Kristie. She was fired. And then she went to the employment tribunal with our help at the Christian Legal Centre. So at the employment tribunal, they said, no, it's all fine. It's fine that you've dismissed her in that way. So then we appealed up to the Employment Appeal Tribunal, which is the next stage up. At that level, then there were two recusals, if I remember correctly, where two different people who were sitting on the panel that decides on that had quite strong had quite strong links to some of the sort of ideology stuff that Kristie had posted about. Trans ideology, links with these sorts of organisations and campaigning on these sorts of things. In these employment appeal tribunals, you have one actual judge, and then you have two other members who are normally someone from a union of some kind, and someone who works in business of some kind. And so these people on the outside, on the edge of the whole situation, those are the people who may have had bias to hear her case. So we had to apply in these cases to say, well, this isn't right that this person is hearing this person's case, because we know that they're quite ideologically against what she stands for. So we need to find some other members. So that happened twice, which is remarkable, because this does not happen very often in legal cases. And it keeps seeming to come up in our cases that there are these sorts of people on these cases. And that's partly what's delayed all of this, because sometimes they've gone, okay, well, we need to find some other people to come and hear this case. So that's part of the reason why it's taken so long. It was that she was dismissed in 2018, but then the legal challenge started in 2019, and then you had COVID and all these kinds of things since then. So that's why it's taken so long.
But eventually, through the twists and turns of the British approaches to law and legal stuff, then she gets to what was the final step? Because was it the Supreme Court or the High Court? These names sort of they get lost in my head.
In this case, it's a very complicated legal system. But after the Employment Appeal Tribunal comes, the Court of Appeal, and then so we're at the Court of Appeal, and then above the Court of Appeal is only the Supreme Court. So that's the top body in England and Wales, is the Supreme Court. So we are just one stage below that at the Court of Appeal, where we helped Kristie win her case, essentially, to spoil the answer, the ending. You sort of spoiled it already, but so last week she had the judgment in her case, which was supportive to her from the Court of Appeal.
So she wins that case. What then happens next for her? So she's been through this. I mean, roller coaster is probably not even close to what she's had to go through with her family, her friends. But then she finally gets to this court process that says, okay, that they were wrong to fire you. What happens next for her then?
Yeah, so that a couple of things can happen. So the decision can still be appealed to the Supreme Court, which would ultimately decide whether to hear an appeal, and then if it has to do that, then we go through this all again at that stage. That's quite rare, because the Supreme Court can only hear a few cases, so it has to be strong arguments. There has to be a good prospect of winning. It has to be an important issue, and so on, to reach the Supreme Court. So there is still a possibility that this case will change in some way because of that. But in the meantime, the case has been sent back down, I believe, to the Employment Appeal Tribunal to decide on the damages that should be paid to Kristie as a result of losing her job and the way she was treated.
Because presumably we're looking at 6 years loss of wages, which is quite a lot. There's, that her character, her ability to hold a job will have been called into question. So I mean that's got to be a calculation I would never ever want to get involved with, because I mean, how do you even work out somebody's life for 6 years? It's much.
I honestly don't know. There are some standardized kind of things
Oh, okay.
that are used, but I don't understand about them.
No, that's fine. But I was just thinking about what she does. I mean, you wouldn't want to go back to your job. I mean, could she say, "Well, I want my job back," or I mean, not that you'd want to, but is that an option?
I think that's quite rare. I think it's quite rare. I don't think that the courts can say you must give someone their job back. I don't think that's the case. I think probably there are some very rare circumstances where that happens, but generally it's some kind of damages.
I'm showing my lack of knowledge about this stuff, which is why we have.
I am too.
I phoned a friend and said, "Paul, talk to me." Right. So, Chrissy's got to be fed up with people. I mean, we're talking about her, which I don't like doing. I don't like talking about people, but this is. I mean, for me personally, I saw this case as this is actually quite monumental in the UK at this time, because what this case is saying is, I have an opinion, and whether you like that opinion or not, I actually have the legal right to hold that opinion, which has to also constitute the ability for me to speak that opinion. Otherwise, we're trying to trap what people are thinking in their brains. That's nonsense. Of course it is. But actually, in a sense, that's kind of what was trying to be done against Kristie. Well, you can have your opinion as long as you never ever utter it and we don't hear it. Well, that's just not workable.
Yeah, so it's very complicated, the law on this, but I'll give you a quick kind of explanation as far as I understand it. You have a right to believe pretty much whatever you want to believe, as long as it stays in your head. That is a complete right as far as the European Convention on Human Rights is concerned, these sorts of things. When you want to express your freedom, that belief, then there are certain tests that can be put on it, because if you're saying something seditious, let's say, I want to overthrow the government in some way, then there will sometimes be reasons for public order why that has to be restricted. If we're advocating for violence, this kind of thing, for example, shouting fire in a crowded theatre, this sort of thing, you can't just do that. So they're very so there are a bunch of ways in which it can be restricted. Now, Christian beliefs that meet certain criteria called Granger criteria and are serious enough to actually warrant protection are important. And they aren't genuinely extreme. They are protected beliefs, and you are allowed to speak them, and you are always allowed to essentially say those beliefs. Now, one of the problems with Kristie's case in the first instance is that she was being labelled as if these views were ideologically crazy, and no one's allowed to even speak them. She was kind of being made. The school was saying that she was like a neo-Nazi, like genuinely, absolutely crazy for this. So Kristie had protected beliefs as well. So then it came on to, she's got these beliefs, she's allowed to express them, but is she allowed to express them in this particular way? And this is where lots of these free speech cases go, because lots of employers want to say, no, it's not about the fact that you shared your beliefs, it's the way you shared them that's the problem. And that sort of excuse for treating people in this way has been rolled out time and time and time again in employment tribunals, and the tiny details of exactly what words were used, and employers and courts kind of going, oh well, we think you said that, but what you really meant was this. People want to turn it all into it's only about what the way that someone said something, and that was inappropriate. And so what this judgment has done is actually given some much clearer guidelines in terms of where that excuse can really be used, and what the law is on those sort of situations. And basically, it's made it about the employer having to really show that their concerns about the way that it was said were really legitimate. And then even if they are legitimate, then they have to be proportionate in how they deal with that situation. And so there are a whole load of extra barriers that the employer basically has to prove to show that was inappropriate and that they shouldn't have said that kind of thing. So that was quite complicated, but essentially you've got is the belief protected? And how are you speaking it? Those two separate elements. Normally it's about how you speak it that's the way that the employers have been able to get away with firing people and kind of treating them badly. And now it's a lot harder for them to do that.
The thing for me, though, I kind of see social media a little bit like going to the pub. I know we don't go to the pub quite so much. It's not sort of the central heart of the village anymore because we live in towns and cities. But I still see it as much like the pub. If you're in your pub with your friends with a pint and you're having a chat, it's like taking that chat and saying, well, in the pub, while you're having a pint, you said this, therefore we're going to sack you because we don't like what you said. And the thing is, if you're down the pub with your mates from work, there's a good chance you're not speaking very highly of your employer. I'm not saying that's okay, but that's kind of normal. Because if you're out from work with people, you're going to share thoughts, probably frustrations against your workplace. That's quite common and normal, not necessarily acceptable, but that's what happens. But effectively, for me, social media is that this is my little lounge. Now, where it changes, of course, is my little lounge is now public across the entire world, which does change things. Of course it does. But I think my personal thought was always, yeah, but it's still my little thing. The fact you're listening into my conversation is up to you. And I think it comes back to, we really do need the ability to swipe away or just scroll by, but we don't do it because it's like, it's the keyboard warrior thing. We like hone into it so hard. How dare you say that I don't agree with you? And it's great to social media. It's great we can communicate further, but communicating further means we're going to meet people who we don't see, who can then say what they think, or they wouldn't say what they think if they were down with us in the pub. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the early internet, in those days, then you had like these kind of little forums, and the people who liked this thing would all have their little discussions over here, and that was also sort of fine, and no one else would see it anyway, and they could speak quite clearly amongst those people. That was the pub sort of atmosphere, and then when you could bring in Twitter and these sorts of things, which then publicize those conversations to everyone, then you kind of lose those spaces that are more like pubs, and obviously any kind of local community kind of place where you might have those conversations. I think that shows one of the values of just local community and actually having places where people have those discussions and meet each other in the face and actually have to talk about things where they disagree with people to some degree.
Just thinking about what Kristie's been through in the last, was it 7 years or so, 6 years? How has Christian Concern supported her? I mean, Christian Concern, some people may know you. They probably know you because of court cases, and Christian Concern spokesman says, but actually there's a lot more to it than that. But for Kristie, I'm guessing she rang up probably Christian Concern and said, help, and then help was offered, and then that help became a 6-7 year journey of walking with her. But what is it that Christian Concern actually do to support people like Kristie who have an opinion that you dare to share? How do you actually support her through? I mean it's a nightmare.
That's a great question, and it'll be different in different cases. I mean, one thing that you went back to is, Kristie is the kind of person who did not come into this for the point of having a fight and argument. She's not that kind of person. Now, some Christians are. Now, some of the people we support are the kind of people who will go into something and maybe, stir up a bit of controversy in some way, hopefully in an appropriate way rather than an inappropriate way. But some people are kind of really up for the fight and kind of really wanting that in the first place, and fair play to them. Kristie is not that sort of person, and so it involves lots of kind of pastoral care, talking through the issues with her, praying with her, helping her have the courage to stand. Also involving family members. She's got a great husband and father who are very supportive to her as well. So there's lots of that stuff in the background, because it's not very easy to be the person who is certainly out in front of cameras and in newspapers and things like this. That's not what most of us want for our lives. So she needs that kind of support. And one of the nice things is we'll gather together lots of the people who are being supported by Christian Legal Centre, for a summer barbecue or something like this, and where we'll, as staff members and some other people, will get a chance to go and speak to them and kind of all encourage each other, and the various people who receive our support get to talk to each other and pray together, and there are all kinds of fun things that are happening because these people are meeting each other and then kind of supporting each other in unexpected ways.
Oh, that's really beautiful. I didn't know about that. That's really, really, it's really good, because the thing is, when we make that, I mean, I was going to say make that decision. I don't think she made a decision to stand. I think she just said something probably quite, because this is what I think. But when we do that, regardless of whether it's intentional or not, and you've shared, so there's some people who were quite happy to get into the affray, actually we do need support because it's a really lonely place to be, isn't it?
Absolutely. Sorry, my thing's beeping all over the place. You're just beeping all over the place at me. Um, uh, what was your question again?
No, I was just thinking for what Kristie's went through, whether, like you said, they've thought I'm going to go and state the truth regardless, or someone like Kristie who's just got a thought. You know, it's a really scary place to be. And what we always find as Christians is that the enemy always wants to make us feel isolated, ostracized, alone, completely unique. Nobody has a clue. But actually, that barbecue, I mean, that's got to be such a source of comfort and strength that, oh, there are other people who are trying to do the right thing for God as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, you mentioned that it's hard. It's hard to go through this, and it's certainly one of the problems with this whole situation has been that it's 2018 to this time, and it's still not even completely finished by any means, because it could go to the Supreme Court, and if it does, then how much more time is it going to take then? So one of the issues is justice delayed is justice denied, in that you're just hanging, part of your life is kind of hanging over you all of this time. The one thing that really does come across when you talk to these people is that they are glad that they stood at the end of it. Even those who've lost their case and who haven't been kind of given the justice we believe is deserved. Even they're glad that they stood, and they find that they are spiritually encouraged through this whole process. God gives them the strength to do what they need to do, and it's great to see the different ways in which they become less timid, perhaps, in sharing their faith going forwards, and it actually gives them more confidence as a result of having stood than they had before.
Wow, what a beautiful point to make, because I don't know Kristie, I've never met her, but I have watched her from afar through Christian Concern. I've seen some of the things. I can see the weight of the world sometimes when you've got to go and stand in front of the cameras or whatever it is. But I love the fact that you're saying that people who are doing this are saying, you know what, I'm glad I did. It's hard, it's scary, it's terrifying probably at various points, and uncertainty. But actually I guess it deepens their relationship with Jesus, which is not to belittle the sacrifice or the struggle, but actually it does.
Yeah. And that's one of the tensions that we have at Christian Concern, because we want to say on one hand, look, this is a real serious problem that we're not able to speak in this way, that we're not allowed to express ourselves as Christians, this kind of thing. So we have to make clear that it's actually really a serious issue on one hand, but we don't want to scare people off on the other hand of actually sharing their faith in appropriate ways. Because we really want the people to do that more, because we believe in the power of the gospel, and we believe that can be transformed and can be persuaded and these sorts of things. And so on one hand, we have to say it's very serious, but also we have to say, look, it's still worth sharing your faith in these kinds of ways, and God will provide what you need.
Amen. Paul, thank you. I think irrespective of whether you agree with Chris's opinion or not, whether you think she has the right thing to say or the wrong thing, whether she shouldn't have said it, the fact that she has a right to say something is such an important part of life here in the UK at the moment. So irrespective of your opinion, whether she should have had that view or not, I think we should be grateful for Christian Concern, who have upheld her right to have an opinion and to share it, because actually that is intrinsically valuable in the UK. And I think I've heard Christian Concern say this many times: if we don't stand up for what is right for us to have, if we don't stand up for our freedoms, they're going to get taken away. And it's not about being in people's faces, and it's not about offending people or think I've got the right to say and be nasty. No. You can be wrong for doing right, but you do need to defend the right to be able to say what you think. It is important. And I'm really glad that Christian Concern have stood with Kristie on this. If somebody's going through something and thinking, oh, help, what's happened? Because it's always that moment of, hang on a minute, I was just having a cup of coffee and now I'm being sacked. If they need to reach out to Christian Concern, what's the best way of doing that?
Find our website, christianconcern.com, or search Christian Concern or Christian Legal Centre, that kind of thing. Give us a call, send us a message, whatever you do. Do it sooner rather than later, because the sooner that we get involved, the easier it is. Some people sometimes call us up the day before they're about to have their disciplinary, and there's no time to really help them. Some people leave it really late, and the later we leave it, the harder. So it doesn't matter if it feels like it's something small at the moment, or you just think it might become something bigger. Give us a call early. We'll talk to you and we'll try and help you.
Paul from Christian Concern, thank you. If you want more, christianconcern.com, and you can get all the information you need. Reach out for help. And like you said, don't wait, reach out earlier. And remember, you're not on your own. You're not on your own. That's the whole point of one of the things that Christian Concern does. So reach out to them. Paul, thank you.
Thanks.